to the war in Ukraine, and Russian officials say a fire has been extinguished at the Kursk nuclear power plant after air defences shot down a Ukrainian drone.
So Russia has blamed Ukraine for this attack on the power plant. The power plant put out a statement saying that there was a drone attack.
The authorities say a transformer was damaged by falling debris, but radiation levels are normal and there's no wider danger.
At 5:17 in the Serebryansky forest, Russian rocket launchers roar to life, pounding Ukrainian trenches in an attempt to seize a corridor to Lyman. But within minutes, a single DJI Mavic 3 drone changes everything. How could one small UAV tilt the course of a battle loaded with artillery, rockets, and tanks? Today, we unpack how Ukrainian drone operators turned an overwhelming Russian bombardment into a crumbling advance, and why this moment shows us the future of warfare might not belong to big guns at all. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now back to the video.
To the war in Ukraine, and Russian officials say a fire has been extinguished at the Kursk nuclear power plant after air defences shot down a Ukrainian drone.
The International Atomic Energy Agency has repeatedly called for restraint from both sides.
Imagine rockets shattering tree lines while a faint hum rises above, the sound of a quadcopter threading through smoke. On the forest floor, Russian BM-27 Yurgen launchers fire 220mm rockets into Ukrainian positions, joined by heavy mortars pounding trench systems cut into the soil. Their goal is blunt: flatten the defensive line and carve out a corridor to Lyman. In minutes, entire sections of woodland ignite, the air shaking with concussions. Any observer looking at the balance of firepower would assume the barrage could not be contained. Mortars hammer the ground in patterned waves.
The authorities say a transformer was damaged by falling debris, but radiation levels are normal and there's no wider danger.
The drone got shot down, and as it fell, there was debris that caused a fire. That fire was put out.
While rocket salvos break into dozens of trails crossing the horizon. Ukrainian dugouts, already stressed from days of pressure, buckle under the weight of this storm. The Russians have bet on shock and speed. They are relying on volume of fire to scatter resistance before infantry arrives to secure the ground. In those opening moments, the tactical picture looks one-sided. Each Oregon truck brings 16 launch tubes, enough to saturate several football fields with explosives in seconds. The heavy mortars, hidden inside depressions and behind brush, complemented that barrage by targeting trenches where infantry took cover. For defending soldiers staring up at contrails arcing across the tree line,
Ukraine has also been targeting oil refineries in recent weeks. Meanwhile, heavy Russian attacks on Ukraine have continued in the past week.
there was little question how serious this situation was. On paper, those systems should collapse their defense before reinforcements could switch positions or bring counter-battery support. Watching the sky rain with steel, one question rose: how could anyone punch through such overwhelming firepower? But then another sound slipped into the chaos, subtle and easy to miss: the blades of a DJI Mavic 3 lifting off from cover. To most people, it would look like a hobby drone bought straight from a store shelf. Light, compact, barely large enough to stir leaves as it rose above the trees. But this drone carried more than just a camera for casual filming. It had been kitted out with infrared sensors and a live mapping feed, patched directly into frontline operators.
President Zelensky has accused Moscow of doing everything possible to prevent a meeting with President Putin.
So Russia has blamed Ukraine for this attack on the power plant. The power plant put out a statement saying that there was a drone attack. Of course, I think very few people really think anything will come out of any talks because they're war weary. They've been going through a war, since the full-scale invasion of 2022.
By climbing just high enough to see heat signatures, it pierced a deception the Russians believed would protect them. Through walls of forest, where trunks and branches hid rocket trucks and mortar pits, the thermal feed picked up glowing outlines of machinery. The engines of BM-27s radiated like beacons. The mortar crews, crouching over tubes, stood out in sharp contrast with the cooler soil around them. The drone fed each movement through real-time imagery, updating friendly operators with second-by-second clarity. Russian crews kept firing their salvos blind. Their entire tactic revolved around saturating areas, hoping weight of fire alone could erase enemies they couldn't see. Ukraine, positioned under bombardment, was now watching with digital eyes. The difference was brutal. Instead of answering with guesses and counter-salvos, Ukrainian operators typed coordinates into systems linked with FPV suicide drones. These were not massive aircraft, but small, stripped-down racing drones armed with explosive charges and controlled by operators seeing through onboard cameras. Within seconds of receiving coordinates, they launched. Operators wearing goggles saw the battlefield from just feet above the ground, slipping the drones under smoke, low through the forest canopy. Their feed was surgical compared to the thunder of saturation fire. Minutes after the first Mavic signatures appeared, FPV drones skimmed the tree line like hunters, one angled toward a clearing where the heat profile of a mortar team glowed. In its camera, a circle tightened, the crew scrambling just as the drone dived. The explosion tore through the pit, scattering earth, silencing the mortar. Another FPV banked left and drove directly into the cabin of a Ukrainian truck, idling between fir trees, rocking the launcher onto its side. What began as a thunderous offensive quickly spiraled. The very concealment the Russian crews relied on had become their downfall, because the Mavic saw through it and guided strikes without guesswork. In under half an hour, several launchers and mortar nests fell silent, picked off one by one, invisible only to those not watching the thermal feed overhead. The barrage meant to dissolve Ukrainian defenses, instead exposed valuable equipment. Crews who thought they had the advantage of firepower found themselves hunted with precision by platforms costing a fraction of their armored vehicles. The tempo of the battle no longer moved to the rhythm of rocket salvos, but to the live feed of a drone retailing for under $2,000. It didn't just blunt missiles flying into the forest, it shifted the fight entirely. A small machine, barely heard above the noise of bombardment, had rewritten the pace of an operation funded in millions. And after Serebryansky Forest, commanders knew a single quadcopter could determine whether an artillery offensive ended in triumph or ashes. The fight in Serebryansky Forest showed that firepower alone cannot win a battle if it moves in the dark. Precision came from information, not from volume, and that turned missiles and mortars into liabilities instead of assets. A single drone proved that knowledge of position and timing outweighs raw force. Now imagine hundreds of these feeds working together, stacking layers of vision no artillery system can outpace. If one operator can collapse an offensive, what happens when an entire brigade wields this edge? The future does not rest with tanks or rockets. It rests with unseen pilots above.